Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the FCC's first ever Connecting the Disconnected Forum during National Digital Inclusion Week. I want to thank everyone who's here for joining us, and thank you especially to the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, the driving force behind this week of action for digital equity. You know, it was about a month ago that the Alliance asked me to record a video to help raise awareness about Digital Inclusion Week, and that's easy. Obviously, I was willing to do so. But, you know, my staff and I have been thinking for some time about what we could do during this week. It was bigger and bolder. And actually, the ideas came when a couple of months ago, my staff started talking to Joshua Edmunds, who's going to join us today. He's the director of digital inclusion for the city of Detroit. And my team started talking to him about Detroit's efforts to enroll consumers in the emergency broadband benefit program. And during one of their calls, he had this idea: why don't we host digital inclusion representatives and officers from around the country? So we looked to see if the FCC had ever done anything like this in the past during Digital Inclusion Week, but we couldn't find anything. And we all agreed that needed to change. And as acting chairwoman, I'm in a position now where I can change that. So we came up with the idea of getting local leaders from communities with real digital divides and bringing them together to share ideas, learn from each other, and collaborate on ways we can all build a more connected future. It seems so simple, but it is such a good idea. And here we are. So a big thank you to Joshua and also the team at the FCC for helping germinate what I know is going to be a fruitful discussion. Now, obviously, a really big part of Digital Inclusion Week is to raise public awareness about the cost of having millions of Americans shut off from internet access, and then more broadly, the need we have in this country to get everyone, everywhere online, no matter who they are, no matter where they live. You know, and it's also a great occasion to rally the troops who are already deeply engaged in this battle to connect every American to the opportunities of the digital age. So Digital Inclusion Week is not the only reason that this gathering is timely, because the FCC is actually doing some big things right now. We're in the process of implementing a pair of unprecedented programs to help people across this country get connected and stay connected during the pandemic. First, as people on this at this session probably know, we've got the $3.2 billion emergency broadband benefit program. It's a big deal. It's the nation's largest ever program to help get people across this country to afford broadband service and get online. And since the program launched in May, we've already enrolled more than 6 million households, and they're generally receiving between $50 to $75 off their monthly internet bill. In fact, most of our panelists come from cities that have seen tens of thousands of residents sign up for the emergency broadband benefit, and I want to hear some more today about just how they made that happen. Second, we have the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which is, again, the largest effort in our nation's history to make sure all students have access to the broadband and devices they need out of school. And we all know this is important because we need to make sure no child's stuck in the homework gap, and every child can get to remote learning if they need to go there. And during this program's first application window, we received requests for more than $5 billion. 10 days ago, we announced the first round of funding. That was $1.2 billion. And just last week, we opened the second application window for this fund, which runs through October 13th. This is a fund that can do a lot of good to help close the homework gap. And I'm looking forward to the additional applications we'll get before October 13th. So when you stand back from these two big initiatives, I think the biggest lesson learned at the FCC is that trusted local voices are the lifeblood of successful enrollment campaigns. We're not going to do it all preaching here from Washington. We know that more than 30,000 individuals and organizations signed up as volunteer outreach partners across the country to help make this possible. And I think their work is fundamental to the success of this program. And I want to hear some more about it from all of our guest panelists from all across the country, how we're going to build on that progress. Because again, trusted local voices are essential to the success of this program. It's how we're going to reach everyone everywhere. So that's my cue to stop talking, start listening. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Also to the FCC staff who've worked hard to make this event possible. Here's to Digital Inclusion Week, having a really robust discussion and a productive forum. And I'm going to now hand it over to my colleague, Commissioner Symington, for his opening remarks and thoughts. Thank you, Nathan, for being here.
Thank you very much, Acting Chairwoman. So I'm delighted to participate in the FCC's first Connecting the Disconnected Forum. Bridging the digital divide is one of the nation's top priorities. The disparities between those with high-speed broadband connectivity and those without are laid bare by the COVID crisis. Programs such as the Emergency Connectivity Fund, one of the primary topics of today's event, have done much to bridge the digital gap. However, the FCC must continue to explore ways for connectivity to improve for those who need it most and lack the resources to get such connectivity. As many times I watched my own children struggle with online learning over the last year, my family was nonetheless extremely fortunate that we were able to participate in it from home, as many other families were not. Therefore, I applaud the efforts of the Acting Chairwoman to continue to find ways to make investment in our digital future a priority. Thanks and best of luck for a fruitful discussion today.
Thank you so much to the Acting Chairwoman and to Commissioner Symington for those very compelling remarks. I'm Ramesh Nagarajan. I'm the Acting Wireline Advisor to the Acting Chairwoman, and I have the honor of moderating today's first panel, which is on the role of communities supporting connectivity. This panel in particular is focused on communities and how they can support efforts to bridge the digital divide. You know, we're all familiar with the term the digital divide, but so often in this discourse on connectivity challenges, it's painted with a single brush. But I think all of us on this panel know that's just not the case. There's diversity in terms of the way that the digital divide shows up in different communities, in big communities and small communities, rural, urban, suburban, different regions of the country. Also in communities that just have been historically overlooked or underserved, or just have been out of reach of that last mile of connectivity. We also know how important it is to have trusted advocates in communities. The pandemic has really laid this bare. We've seen schools, libraries, faith-based organizations, community organizations, healthcare providers, food pantries, and so many more become places where people have turned to get connected. We've all seen this in the FCC's Emergency Connectivity Fund that the Acting Chairwoman and Commissioner Symington mentioned. That helps schools and libraries ensure their students and patrons can get online to participate in remote learning. And so I'm looking forward to a discussion today about how schools, libraries, other anchor institutions in your communities have worked to assist efforts to bring more connectivity to your communities. So this morning, I'm honored to be joined by three panelists. We have Mayor Adrian Perkins, who's the 56th mayor of Shreveport, Louisiana. We have Joshua Williams, who's the Innovation Fellow for Houston's Department of Innovation. And we have Juliet Fink-Yates, who's the Digital Inclusion Manager in the Office of Innovation Technology from the city of Philadelphia. So thank you all to all the panelists for being here. First things first, let's get started by giving you the chance to introduce yourselves and to talk a little about where you're from and your role in bridging the digital divide in your community. And if we could start with Mayor Perkins. I think you're on mute for a second there.
Gotta unmute. Thanks. Once again, good morning, everybody. Very happy to be on this panel. Excited about the conversation that we'll have today. I am Mayor Adrian Perkins in Shreveport, Louisiana. I'm originally from Shreveport, Louisiana as well. Went off to attend undergrad at West Point, the United States Military Academy. Was in the Army for 8 years and then went on to Harvard Law School where I got my big interest in technology. So I'm a bit of a geek with this stuff. And I've been happy to bring my interest here back home to Shreveport. Shreveport's like many communities. We're roughly about 200,000 citizens, but like many communities, we have a digital divide. The axis is east-west here, and we've done some innovative things to discover that digital divide. I'll be talking about a little later. And what we've really focused on here at City Hall is mapping out the digital divide here and how we can put resources and collaborations to close that gap. And like so many other cities as well, that digital divide was really exposed throughout this pandemic, has really been exposed throughout this pandemic and really given a more of a sense of urgency to our citizens. So we're working hard to do what we can to close it. But happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. Mr. Williams? Would you like to go ahead? Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited, and thank you to the FCC for bringing us all together. My name is Joshua Williams, and I'm here representing the City of Houston and the Mayor's Office of Innovation, and also Fuse Corps, which is a national nonprofit that partners with local government agencies to work on initiatives like the one that we're trying to tackle today, the digital divide. And I am leading digital inclusion initiatives, working with internal partners, external partners, just trying to expand digital access to increase equitable outcomes. And I'm leading the charge by making sure that we have a good grasp on the connectivity data, where the need is, where the opportunities are, where the assets and infrastructure are available to increase connectivity, making sure that we have explored all of our options in terms of free and low cost internet options, trying to get as creative as possible, making sure that we are building strategic partnerships and being active participants in coalitions that have a bunch of people with big brands that are smarter than me doing this work, and also making sure that we're trying to be as creative as possible with identifying funding to support our efforts. And we just have a big focus on sustainability. And I'm so excited to be here and learn from everyone. And good to see Mayor Perkins. I'm actually from Shreveport as well, so it's good to see fellow Louisiana on the call.
Gotcha.
Well, thank you, Ms. Yates.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for having me here. I am the Digital Inclusion Manager in the Office of Innovation and Technology for the City of Philadelphia. I've been doing digital inclusion work for about 20 years when long ago I was helping to run a small dial-up internet service for free for low-income Philadelphians, and we had about 10,000 Philadelphians signed up for that service way back when. And so pivoting to city government, I joined right before the pandemic in this position, and it was really an important moment. The city had been doing some very good work in digital inclusion, but we needed to ramp up really quickly. We needed to address the needs of our K-12 population, and so plunged into that work. And now my world is really sort of similar to Josh Williams and Mayor Perkins, is really connecting all of the departments in the city around how we can be aligned on digital inclusion efforts, how we can make sure that the decisions we are making are equitable, that the neighborhoods that need to be served that have not been served appropriately have the resources that they need, the devices, the connectivity, the skills and training, and the outreach and awareness that comes with that. And so we've set up a number of committees, and we have a number of internal and external partners that we've been working with, everybody from our universities to our healthcare centers to our community-based organizations to our ISPs, really trying to connect all those dots.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. And so, as I mentioned, I think the digital divide, we all know, looks different in different communities. Sometimes it's about access, just the broadband's not available. Sometimes it's about adoption, and sometimes it's about affordability. And sometimes it's about all three, or a mixture of those. So I'd like you to share, each of you to share what you see as challenges to connectivity in your particular communities. And maybe, Ms. Yates, if you'd like to start this time.
Sure, thank you. So in Philadelphia, I would say that affordability is really the number one factor in addressing the digital divide here. We have two major ISPs in Philadelphia, but only one that really covers the entire city, and only one that offers a low-cost option at $9.99. And so what we're seeing is that price point is really important in Philadelphia, and that the emergency broadband benefit, for example, is tremendously helpful in helping to close that divide. But there are some other challenges that we've been seeing as well. So as with any new benefits or programs that we've launched, awareness is a really key factor. We're seeing that as much as we kind of put out information about these programs, there still remains a lack of awareness. And that there's a lot of complicated factors that go into getting access. So it's not just that people aren't aware of it. It's really that they have like really complicated household structures, and not every solution, a wired solution, might not work for them. And so figuring out and unpacking what's going to work for a family can take, a 10, 20, 30-minute interview to understand, well, how many people are in your household? Can you even get one of these ISPs to your household? Maybe a hotspot is the better option. So really this sort of understanding the nuance, it's not so easy as flipping a switch. In terms of connectivity, that's been a big challenge we've seen in getting folks connected. And the last one I say is this concept of time scarcity. So people really, they have a lot of priorities. They're struggling with their kids in school. They may be struggling to pay other bills. and taking the time to apply for a benefit and then applying for the ISP that they need and then getting it sent to them and then figuring out how to set it up, that takes time. It can take several hours or even weeks to get somebody connected sometimes. And so that's another huge challenge we're seeing.
Mr. Williams, do you want to add something from your perspective?
Absolutely. I'm glad we're discussing this. I'm glad that question was added. You know, for us, the neighborhoods that we are targeting and trying to connect, they're historically underserved, underinvested. Mm-hmm. So you can easily assume that, well, certainly it has to be an infrastructure issue. But we learned that data is so critical to making sure that we can pinpoint exactly what the connectivity challenges are. Using resources from FCC, we have a wonderful GIS department that has put together an interactive map for us, Connected Nation, NTIA. We were just trying to partner with as many people as possible to get as accurate as we could connectivity data. And when we did our digging, we learned that, hey, these neighborhoods have 3 or more ISPs. Some provide fiber, satellite, etc. So what is the issue? And we had to partner with our anchor institutions to get a better understanding. And we learned that, like in Philadelphia, it's an affordability issue. You know, prices were too high for these families. And we also learned, again, like in Philly, awareness was an issue. I may know something is available, but I don't know how to get to it. There's a language barrier. There's a transportation barrier. I mean, I can go on and on. So we're really just digging and partnering with our anchor institutions to get a better sense of how we can reach the people where they are, how we can make sure they understand that these options are available, and making sure that we, like I said, explore all options that are available to be low cost and free. We'll take free. Free is always good. So,
Great. Mayor Perkins, so both Mr. Williams and Ms. Yates talked about affordability and kind of and other challenges related to access. Did you see the same things in Shreveport, or are there also just more general problems there in getting people connected?
No, we do. And I mean, another fact about our demographics here is that about 30% of my population lives at or below the poverty line. So affordability is a huge issue here. When I talked earlier about our digital divide really goes along the axis of east-west, and that coincides with our higher income neighborhoods in the east side, which we have a lot of connection points, and our lower income neighborhoods on the west side. But in addition to that, access is a problem because a lot of the quality of service is pretty poor on the west side of the city as well. Even for the families that can't afford it, it's not very reliable service that they have, minimal bandwidth and things of that nature. So we saw a lot of our students during the pandemic have issues on the west side of the city, even when their family could afford having internet access. And we're working alongside the ISPs to try to remedy some of those and putting some public resources towards the infrastructure there as well. The last thing I'll say is that the ISPs that do have those lower income programs and those programs for families that would qualify, what we found is they're very burdensome here. You got to be able to get on the internet to apply for the form. Problem number one, you don't have internet in your home. You got to get to a library at some point to do that. And then once you get on the internet, you got to print documents and fax them in. And it's really, so we're doing what we can right now, working with them while publicizing these programs to be able to get more families to do some, adoption of what's available, the resources that are available. But it's not easy at all. It's kind of like solving a Rubik's Cube, because once you go down one hole, you think you've solved the problem, you got to turn and solve another problem. But we're working alongside our partners here trying to fix it for everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's I really appreciate all of those comments, and I think it's, it just shows how like multifaceted a problem this is, right? That there is like, you hit one thing, and then there's you work on affordability, you work with the ISPs, and then you realize there's an access problem or there's a time.
Oh yeah.
Problem. And all hands on deck. We've all got to connectivity fund that the chairwoman mentioned, and so this is a $7.17 billion program that will fund schools and libraries to get their students and library patrons connected. And so I'd like to ask each of you, how have you seen the schools and libraries in your communities work to address the homework gap and other learning gaps, both before the pandemic and afterwards, and during the pandemic? How happy if you talk about the ECF, but more generally, what you're seeing from schools and libraries and how they're helping people get connected. And I'll just throw it open to whoever wants to go first.
I'll jump in first. I went last time. Yeah, so we have our Shreve Memorial Library System is a library system here in Shreveport, and they'll be participating in the neighborhood Wi-Fi program to connect those in neighborhoods to internet that don't have it. And a lot of our library systems are in some of those low-income neighborhoods where I said lack infrastructure or reliable internet. So that's going to be great. It's going to be a game changer for a lot of families. And our school system here is Caddo Parish School Board. They'll be exploring all the options as well for more connectivity and creative ways to connect those students with internet. And our school system has been the largest recipient of public dollars. They have the largest, they have the most resources as far as infrastructure goes with broadband connectivity. So they're a big player with this, and we've been working alongside them. But the school system really suffered. As I said, many of the children in our system didn't have access to reliable internet last year, and many don't have it this year, even though most are back in the classroom. And we heard tons of stories of parents that had to drive their children to libraries to get access to internet so that their children could do their homework and keep up in the classroom. So we don't want to experience that again, even if we go through another again, and just adding more urgency to solving these problems.
Josh, do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
So I was going to say that the Emergency Connectivity Fund, I think, is one of the most important programs that has come out of the FCC, and I really want to acknowledge that. In Philadelphia, we were able to rapidly stand up PHL Connected, which is our citywide program for pre-K through 12 students to get them connected to the internet. We couldn't have done it without our school district, but Philadelphia also has 70 some charter schools. We have archdiocese schools. We have a whole range of schools, and we wanted a solution that any student in Philadelphia, regardless of what school they went to, could participate in. And so one of the challenges that we had in working with all these different schools, some with different systems, student information systems, was really understanding where the need was, how to get them the solutions that they needed very quickly. And this idea of bulk purchasing, which is what the Emergency Connectivity Fund allows, is really, really critical, we think, in this long-term sustainability problem. And I can't say that enough. We think that there's going to continue to be this need. Schools will always need to refresh their hardware for students if we want to move to a one-to-one device situation for every student, which will really, really help address the need for devices for students and families. But then the bulk purchasing of internet is a game changer as well. And so that is a very, very important mechanism. And then the other piece that I will say around this is that, the library can serve everyone in Philadelphia. And so allowing the libraries also to bulk purchase internet and devices really can shift the landscape for all of us, but it's going to shift it in Philadelphia, where our free library has also applied for ECF funds. So we think that this is a really, really critical program. I can't say this enough. And the only thing that I would add to it is really we would love to see it expanded, this concept of bulk purchasing, and beyond just our schools and libraries, because we think there's other institutions like our healthcare centers, our government entities that are also able to have that bulk purchasing power and have the distribution mechanisms that are needed to get devices and internet connectivity set up for households.
That is great, and I want to echo the bulk purchasing, but I also want to take time to really highlight and big salute to our school districts here in Houston. Pre-pandemic, they were working on digital literacy for students. They were already distributing hotspots and devices, making sure students had the equipment and the skills to operate those devices. And when the pandemic hit, I saw all hands on deck, just a full blitz from every school district in the city. HISD, I know we witnessed them doing food drives / tech drives out in it's Houston, so out in the 100-degree weather, sweating skin off to make sure people could eat and also have a device to connect with at home. We took advantage of our libraries, as everyone mentioned. They're like they're truly a community anchor institution They were open to distribute hotspots, distribute devices, lead virtual digital literacy training. We didn't want this to happen, but they opened their doors to say, hey, if you need to come to the library, if you need to sit outside and connect to the internet. They also used a mobile hotspot that they were driving around to park in neighborhoods and help people get connected. So we just saw a lot of creativity and hands on deck. And we saw a lot of future proofing. As everyone mentioned, we would hate to see this happen again. We feel like sometimes we felt like we were reactive instead of proactive to this pandemic, but not the libraries and the school districts. They already had mechanisms in place and systems in place to make sure people were connected and could connect from home. Pandemic hit and they worked to improve that connection from home. We had issues with tech support, language barriers, like as I mentioned earlier, but there was always a way to work around those issues and make sure that students felt like they could continue their remote learning and have some type of normalcy. I use that loosely, but have some type of normalcy in their learning during the pandemic. So I just want to just give a shout out to our school districts. If we have anybody on, and to our libraries, we thank you. And going forward, we're working with Harris County Public Library, and they have this great opportunity where they are just again another full-on blitz to distribute devices and get digital literacy training to those who need them, and able to keep that device for the life of the device and just have it and have tech support, have all the backing that you need from Harris County Public Library, from the providers like the T-Mobiles of the world. So we feel good, and we feel going forward that we'll be prepared for something like this again. But we don't want to experience this again, but we're prepared if it happens again.
Can I just add one thing here? It's a very important point was brought out. I'm glad you talked about it, but distributing those hotspots along with the tech products that you're handing out, whether it's a computer, whether it's an iPad, you name it, is critical. And we actually did not do that at the beginning. Our school system didn't do that at the beginning. They had this mass distribution. They purchased all the computers and the iPads that they needed. They pushed them out to students. And quickly realized, because pawn shops were calling the school board saying people are turning in computers, but quickly realized that some of these students were taking these products home without internet. We weren't handing out hotspots. So, you already have a student that's at home, in underserved communities going through it, and you really kind of pile on them when you give them a brick, essentially, this technological brick that they cannot use to do their homework. But they quickly adjusted. We're able to get hotspots into neighborhoods. We were able to adjust as well at the city. We were able to help by broadcasting broadband from a lot of our community centers, our recreational centers, and we saw the amount of computers given to pawn shops decline. But unfortunately, again, it was in that western part of my city where the digital divide is, where a lot of households don't have access to internet or have poor quality to internet. So it just shows that this problem is very, very holistic. And we really have to create that foundation before we move forward, and especially before we go into another crisis.
Yeah, thank you. I think everyone's point about the importance of schools and libraries kind of just puts a kind of a special focus on anchor institutions and how they're so important. They've been so important in this crisis, and how they're just important generally, getting people connected. So I'd like to take, I guess, the lens out a bit. And to ask each of you, what outreach have you done to help community organizations, so schools and libraries, but others too, some of those community centers that you mentioned, Mayor Perkins, and others, to engage on these connectivity issues? And then, are there lessons that you've learned in doing so that you'd like to share to other communities that are kind of looking and seeing what they should do to connect their residents?
So,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say, like I mentioned, we participated in things like food drives / tech drives, but we also partnered with nonprofit organizations that are in the digital inclusion space to lead distribution efforts. Having distribution events to make sure people could come out to one place, had translators available to make sure that we were able to communicate with all participants. So we did a lot on the distribution front, but I do want to highlight the lesson that we learned. The lesson that we learned was that collaboration is critical. The pandemic hit, and we had a lot of people scram to make sure people were connected and keep them connected. And we realized that there were a lot of silos within the city, external partners, just a lot of silos. And so we learned that when we put our heads together and we partner, whether it be distribution efforts, finding methods to connect people, finding the funds to connect people, We go a lot further when we're working together instead of silos. So that is just my biggest lesson. We are really focused in preaching. It's like collaboration and digital inclusion coalitions are now gospel, and we hope to keep it that way. So coming out of this, anchor institutions, other local government agencies, private partners, we're just all about collaboration. That's the biggest lesson learned in our efforts to connect people with our community anchor institutions.
Yeah, so I think that our, the community-based organizations in Philadelphia, were chomping at the bit. They were calling me every day at the beginning of the pandemic saying, I need devices. How do I get hotspots? I need X, Y, and Z. Where can I go? And so they were doing so much incredible work to serve the particular needs of whatever the particular community is. And we have a lot of small communities that had a lot of particular needs, whether it was, an organization serving a Cambodian community, an organization serving people with disabilities. So everybody really was looking for solutions and working together. The city was fortunate, and we have a couple coalitions that were in place prior to the pandemic. So we have something called the Digital Literacy Alliance, which has a bunch of stakeholders and community-based organizations that sit on it. And we also have something called the Technology Learning Collaborative, which pulls together a large number of community-based organizations. And so our mechanisms for getting out information kind of went through those two channels, which hit probably 200 different organizations across the city. But then I think we also stood up these digital navigator organizations, a digital navigator program, and those, by pointing people kind of to really, really knowledgeable places where they could learn more about how to sign up for internet, how to get a device, get some support as they needed it. Those groups were really able to become experts in that space. And so then we could start pointing other agencies to those digital navigation orgs to say, you need devices, go here. You need help with internet, go here, and really kind of streamline it a little bit. The one other thing I'll say about our outreach and communication efforts is that it requires a lot of, so I think these organizations really can do it, but it does require resources and support. And so one of the things that, we had folks doing at one point was phone banking and door-to-door canvassing for our district households to make sure that they were aware of PHL Connected. And that level of engagement is really crucial, but it takes time and it takes a lot of people power to do it. And people really need to understand the referral mechanisms and the programs. And so there's a lot of training involved in it. And so this is not this is something that does require our investment in resources to make sure that our community-based organizations are not drowning in this work, but that they have the capacity to do it because they're so crucial. They're so crucial to making this happen.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say my story of outreach is quite unique and risky. When I was on the campaign trail, I was talking about bridging the digital divide. It's a bit risky because down here, we were some slow adopters to some of the technology, and everybody didn't know what I was talking about when I talked about broadband and high-speed internet and things of that nature. And that's risky when you're a first-time political candidate and you're running for mayor. But I really beat the message home, right alongside public safety, right alongside economic development, things that people understood. And I talked about how technology, you could leverage technology to improve upon those things and generally improve upon the quality of life. I don't quite think, even after electing me, that my community understood it, but we got on a mission hard right when we walked into City Hall. Myself, I hired the city's first chief technology officer, and we went out and found partners, one of which was the school board that I mentioned earlier, who has the most infrastructure here. And we started to see what we could do to bridge the digital divide. Well, a year and 3 months into my term, the pandemic hit, and the pandemic, I would say, provided more outreach and understanding about our digital divide than my office ever could. All of a sudden, everybody in the community were talking about using all the buzzwords that I was using on a campaign trail, and everybody understood it. You fast forward to a couple months ago, after receiving ARP funding, we did a 2-month town hall where we went throughout the city. We spoke at probably 30, 40 neighborhood organizations. We asked the citizens to give us feedback on what they wanted to see us use American Rescue Plan dollars for. And overwhelmingly in those meetings, and the top three was, hey, we need to bridge the digital divide in our city. So just in a matter of 2.5, 3 years, the conversation here has completely changed. And everybody, again, a community that was a bit slow adopters to technology, everybody understands the urgency of bridging the digital divide. So right now we have a coalition of partners on the public side, a lot of entities from sheriff's office, the school board, libraries, you name it, that are working together now to solve this problem that people really didn't prioritize before. So we're excited here, and outreach is working, but I gotta say we were very much helped along with the pandemic.
Thanks. Thanks so much. It does seem like the pandemic in a lot of ways accelerated trends that were there and really moved us forward in some ways, but in terms of the importance of digital technology in our lives. I'd like to introduce Chimena Larkin, who's the Director of Digital Strategy for the Chicago Mayor's Office, and she'll be joining us on the panel today as well. Ms. Larkin, we were just talking about the role of community organizations and institutions in engaging on connectivity issues, and I'd like to get your thoughts from the perspective of the Chicago Mayor's Office. What lessons have you learned about working with schools, libraries, other, but also nonprofits and other community organizations, and getting your citizens connected?
Yeah, I think it's been very interesting in the pandemic. One of the goals that Mayor Lightfoot launched very early on was to have 100,000, she set a goal in 4 years, to have 100,000 Chicago public school students have high-speed internet. And that would include across the next 4 years. So that goal would be reached by June 25th, the end of her campaign. And right now in the pandemic, that accelerated things. So that was interesting because I think, like a lot of these things, if you don't have the infrastructure, we know government tends to be a little bit slow, but honestly, anything that you're doing can really help speed up the process. I can't take credit for a lot of the work being done. It's a lot of different colleagues. I'm sure you guys have this. Candace Moore, she's our first Chief Equity Officer for the city. So she really spearheads a lot of this, and finance, the Chicago Connected program that I'm talking about. So that's been to get high-speed internet. We're currently at 64,000 students, 42,000 households. And in year 2, we just crossed it in September. What we added on was making sure it's not just the students who have the technology, the space, but also their parents. What does the future of the workforce look like in a pandemic when everyone had to work from home? I think there are many people who are assessing and reassessing their career paths. Jobs that they had went away. So now you also have parents, maybe there's uncles, siblings in the home. So in the year 2 anniversary, what the city did was launch a partnership with Coursera, so that the families that were part of the Chicago Connected program, that's free high-speed internet, now all of a sudden had access to Coursera. And if you're unfamiliar with the program, it's one of the top leading educational programs for personal professional development. So now these families have free access to these organizations. And I heard many people talking about community engagement. That's also a really important piece, because when we think of digital, I think a lot of what we're talking about is social media. A lot of people think of that, but even your traditional, your digital billboards, we employ digital billboards to get this information out to folks and let them know how they can apply, making sure you have different languages available. Our community engagement team has had to do a lot of work on the ground as well. So making sure that you're connected. It's all these infrastructure pieces. I think, again, when you look back on how you're partnering and getting the information out on your services is, what does your distribution network look like? You want to be able, as soon as you have something, as soon as you have a disruption, an emergency, to communicate that information. Are your systems set up to be able to activate and mobilize your teams quickly so you don't lose people to that emergency, the system, the people, making sure that the people who need these resources have access to the information and not when it's too late. So it's a lot of moving parts, and it's not just digital as we see it, but it's all those pieces of your team, your finance team, budget, community engagement, thinking through equity, and making sure, I mean, we know that certain parts of the city have different access points. So even our libraries, what you were talking about, we've created, for the whole month of August, we actually launched a virtual hire event. So at a number of libraries, people could go to actually print out their resumes. They could talk to a career coach who could prep them. This virtual career fair was made so that people were set up for success, so that they were walked through the interview process and could practice. If they needed Wi-Fi to do a virtual interview, they could book a room that was specifically formatted for this. And each week had a different theme. So we could see infrastructure, union, hospitality, and every week, every Friday, they were guaranteed spots that they were hiring on site for. So we're also circling back, preparing for a workplace that is post-pandemic.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for that. That's really is really interesting. So we've had a lot of discussion about schools and libraries and the focus on getting children connected in particular. But this question asks about senior citizens. And so senior centers, this question says that are excellent partners with the ability to distribute devices, provide transportation and training. But they've found that senior housing locations are in desperate need of hotspots. Are there any plans to target senior populations and outreach? And if the panel has done anything in particular to address senior citizens in your communities.
I'll jump in here. So we have a council on aging here in Shreveport, Louisiana, that we work through with our community development department. And absolutely, we've targeted them since the beginning of the pandemic as well, and all of our vulnerable communities and all of our underserved communities that we know would take, a bigger brunt of the pandemic's fallout than others. So in working with our council on aging, we were able to get our seniors with hotspots. We did a partnership here with some local ISPs as well. We were able to get them hotspots, and we were able to we opened up, we did extended hours at some of our community centers in the library area when it wasn't so safe to put people doing physical activity. We did extended hours in our recreational center so that some seniors could get there, get on the internet if they needed to. And we provided transportation for that as well with our public transportation system. So we kind of bridged the gap as best we could, but we were attentive to them. We did listen to them throughout and made sure that they weren't kind of left behind, they weren't left behind in all of our initiatives.
For us in Houston, we just had to rely on those community anchor institutions that are boots on the ground, those digital inclusion nonprofits that are working with these underserved areas, and they have their fingers on the pulse a lot better than ours are. So when they're working with these groups, they understand that, hey, if Joshua's family, he has a grandfather that needs to be connected, needs some digital literacy training, and whatever they're delivering to that student, they're delivering those services to the senior citizen as well. School districts had that same approach. They did a great job of partnering with organizations that could get them the most accurate data as possible, ask the right questions, make sure they had a great understanding of who was in the household and what those needs were. So again, school districts took the same approach. If I'm serving a student, I want to make sure I'm serving each family member in this household as well. And they just made sure that they were able to connect senior citizens. They had a better understanding of what those needs were and who those members of the households are and libraries, I can say the same thing. So it's like we relied heavily on our boots on the ground community organizations to let us know who needs what and how we can assist them in meeting those needs.
Yeah, in Philadelphia, we were able to fund 7 organizations, community-based organizations, through our Digital Literacy Alliance Fund. And that actual round of funding was predominantly for limited English proficiency serving organizations. But the vast majority of the work that those organizations are doing is with seniors in these populations. And so I think there was this real unfortunate intersection around the pandemic, vaccine access, and our senior populations being incredibly vulnerable and isolated, that really raised this issue up with seniors in a really important way. So we were really pleased to be able to provide some of funding to direct community-based organizations to help our seniors. We also really listen and consult with a lot of our senior organizations who've been doing some of this work around the digital divide. And we've connected them with some of our healthcare partners. We hold a digital health equity task force in Philadelphia. And so really trying to connect this idea of how can our healthcare systems support medically vulnerable populations, many of whom are our senior population. So really trying to make these connections really explicit between larger groups who are serving the same communities.
Yes, and very similar to everyone on the call, we rely on our community partners to help uplift the message that we're doing. We go to Chicago Public Schools, that network, to make sure the touch point is happening. So not just the students, but that we understand that a parent, a grandparent might be reading their information. Excuse me. We also are recently launching specific around the pandemic and COVID senior vaccinations. It's a constant approach to also thinking through it's not just kids and students, but that program I mentioned, Chicago Connected, is meant to touch on the whole household, senior members of the family, and then our community partners going to nursing homes and making sure that we are talking to the seniors in our community and also making sure that they have the information they need through multiple different channels, whether it's paper and digital. And again, it all kind of flows through the same gap, but we go through a TikTok of every single thing that we can think of to make sure we're hitting that touch point, similar to a campaign where you're just repeating that message over and over and making sure they have the resource they need.
And I want to jump back in and give a big shout out
Sure.
to our health departments in Houston and in Harris County, because as everyone mentioned, vaccine rollouts they really connected with us to make sure that we had an understanding of the needs that were out in the communities, particularly senior citizens, what digital inclusion resources were available, how we could partner with them to make sure that we could get people connected and also get people vaccinated. So I just want to take a moment to give a big shout out. I don't want to interrupt everybody. Sorry.
No, of course, thanks for that. No, this is it's great to hear how all of your communities are focusing on, everyone. It's students, it's seniors, it's people looking for jobs, and so that's really heartening to hear. Question for you. So, I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., and, there's a lot of debate right now about funding for broadband. As Washington and the states look for what could potentially be a once-in-a-generation funding opportunity for broadband, what do you want policymakers discussing this to know about what's needed most from your perspective as people who are involved in this every day?
I want to say build in future proofing. And what I mean by that is, in the city, we're working on a long-term effort. And one of those long-term efforts is raising the broadband standard. Pandemic has proven, the minimum standard 25.3 doesn't always work for every family. We have members on our team who experience the issue of having, they just needed more speed, they needed more quality. And so one of our efforts, we're definitely charging people that are going to partner with us to raise that bar. So I think, we're thinking down the road in 2030, 25.3 definitely won't be, that won't be any good. So we're just looking at different angles to make sure that we are future-proofing, that we take care of the issue at hand now, but also down the road, people will be connected. They will be connected with high quality. They will be connected with high speed. So I think just in this money is great, but I think just in future-proofing, making sure that if this issue arises again, we have the full backing of the federal government in policy and in quality.
So this is Juliet. So I have a couple things. I 100% agree with what Josh said, and I echo it. What I will also say is that we really need good regular data on network quality, on the fiber and Wi-Fi networks in our regions, and the cost comparisons. And I think that we are now, there's an understanding that we need this, but we don't have it yet. So unless municipalities fund it themselves to get it, most places are working from older data that's not current or up to date from what they need now to tell them kind of what their situation is on the ground. So that data is really important, and data sharing across entities who are getting and serving the populations in the states is going to be really crucial. We need to remove barriers for municipal networks. Many states have bans on municipal networks. And so, that might not be the right solution for every municipality. It might not be, the right solution. But it's really important that municipalities and cities have options and can figure out what the best solutions are for their communities. I also think that there's this need to really understand and separate mobile phone need from broadband to the home. And so, because what we're seeing a lot is we're seeing people using their EBB subsidy to support their mobile phone. And for some people, that might be all that's needed, but for most people, they need both. And so what's happening is that Lifeline doesn't go far enough to cover their mobile phone. And so they're forgoing broadband to the home in order to get that mobile phone access that they need. So really an attention to this issue that a mobile phone is not enough anymore to do what you need to do in society. And then what lastly I would say is we always talk about it, the three-pronged issue. You need a working device, you need the internet connectivity, and you need outreach, digital skills, training, and supports. And if every funding stream or everything we do doesn't include those things, we're not going to solve this problem. It can't just be about the wires on the ground. It has to be about the working device and the skills and training that's been provided and offered as well.
Yeah, and I'm with Juliet. I mean, when we look at the data, I mean, one report that came out in April 2020 for us, Kids for Chicago, it's an education advocacy group, and the Metropolitan Planning Council did a report titled Digital Equity in the Coronavirus Era. What we saw was that 1 in 5 children lacked access to reliable internet in home. And these children were predominantly Black and Latino in the city's south and west sides. So when we see those programs, we can, by the end of it, but a year later, I should say, we could see that the program had cut the city's digital divide by nearly 2/3. So we see that these programs work. And they're real, actionable, measurable success stories in closing an equity gap that we see. I mean, that's what people talk about in Chicago. So we see that these programs can literally change the future of our city. So when you're looking at these numbers, this information, how this money is spent, does it work? Yes, if there's investment. And to Juliet's point, all those 3 things that you're hitting on, we can see change, we can see improvement in the city, the quality of life, and it goes through the whole generation. It's children, adults, seniors, there's a higher improved quality of life, and we close that equity gap.
Yeah, the thing I'll add to this is a little bit, I come at it from a different angle. It's a little bit more of a principled approach. I would tell those lawmakers in Washington, D.C. and the policymakers not to rely so much on private telecoms to solve this problem. What I mean by that is there's been some federal cases that have prevented municipalities from providing broadband outside or providing internet services outside of their particular jurisdiction. Adding to that framework, there's been a lot of state legislators that have been extremely prohibitive from what municipalities can do and the public sector can do as well in bridging the digital divide. And honestly, we've seen what telecoms are going to do, and oftentimes they're going to go into our more affluent neighborhoods and build out a model that lends to their bottom line, and for them to create revenue for their company, their private entities. That's what they do. So the reason why I go so high in my guidance is saying, like, don't just depend on those private entities, because right now you don't have a very competitive market, and the private entities are doing what's in their best benefit, and we're not serving the general public the way that we need to. And that's the reason why these digital divides have persisted. I'm not just saying, hey, public entities will solve the middle mile problem and the last mile problem and all that, but it has to be an ecosystem of public entities, of nonprofits, of entrepreneurial ISPs to go in and fill those those gaps where our, historically large ISPs aren't currently filling them. And until DC, stop relying so much on the ISPs to do the right thing, I think we're going to continue to see that, and we need to incentivize our overall system so that we can provide those services and create a marketplace where everybody's incentivized to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I go back to the Chicago Connected program because that's a really great example of how it brought through government, private, nonprofit funding to really create a successful program, exactly what Mayor Adrian is speaking about, which is you need all these entities. It won't be contingent. Success is not contingent on one. It has to be a full investment from all the players in the space to see real change come about.
And I just want to say that to Mayor Perkins' point, we're taking that approach in the city of Houston. Cities like New York are taking that approach to say we're opening the door for any willing participant that is going to meet the needs that we have, that are going to provide high quality, free, low cost internet. So we're doing it in cities, but as Mayor Perkins mentioned, we can do it at the highest level of the country. I think that will really crack down on that issue. We got to get creative and let people that want to provide innovative solutions get those solutions to the people that are in need. And I think that would be a great idea to go to the top. I mean, this may sound extreme, but I even like to see legislation that just declares broadband access as a human right. Like the pandemic has shown that we need it just as much as we need water, lights, et cetera. So to have some kind of legislation to just really force the issue and say this is a human right. If you do not have these three skills that Julie had mentioned, you are violating someone's rights, and you need to fix that.
100%. Yeah, I mean, drilling down one more piece, it's what our federal government does with those resources. If they're still giving huge chunks of funding to those traditional ISPs and entrusting them to administer programs like the ones I talked about before that's quite burdensome on my citizens, then again, you're going to miss a whole lot of people. So if you start to disperse those resources and give them to public entities so that we can have better data collecting initiatives out there, and we don't have to rely on them, to give them to nonprofits who are out there and who have created the relationships in the community and know those details. If the government actually shows where our values are by spreading those resources around to that ecosystem, I think you're going to see a much more fair and equitable marketplace as well for digital connectivity.
And we're talking a lot about data access, but a point that Josh really made that makes me think about it is legislation around that human right, but also thinking through phase 2 of this, which is media literacy and this information of how people understand what they see online and how they're able to distinguish what is truth and what is not. So I'm a big proponent for digital media literacy, especially as we see a lot of communication moving forward and, thinking through phase 2.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone's comments. I think we all learned a lot about how communities can support connectivity, about what you want to see from DC and from the states, and kind of the roles of anchor institutions, of schools and libraries, connecting seniors and connecting your vulnerable communities. So I want to thank each of the panelists for being with us today. I know I learned a lot. I hope everyone watching learned a lot as well. And we really appreciate you being here. It's 10:59, so I will turn it over to my colleague, Kayla, who will be leading our second panel today.
Hello, everyone. This is a pleasure to be here with you today, and thanks, Ramesh, for the introduction. For those of you that don't know me, I am Kayla Hernandez-Ulloa, the Associate Division Chief for the FCC's Consumer and Governmental Affairs. The first panel focused on adoption and access to broadband, and we heard that affordability can often be a hurdle for households that want to get connected. COVID-19 made this problem more acute for many households, including research that was done. So the Pew Research found that almost a third of Americans worried about paying their internet bill during the pandemic. The Emergency Broadband Benefit Program was developed specifically to address affordability of households struggling to stay connected during the pandemic. As the acting chairwoman mentioned, this panel will explore some of the successful strategies that communities have developed to build awareness of and enrollment in the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. I'm joined today with a great panel. I'd like to introduce the panel. First, Joshua Edmonds, the Director of Digital Inclusion for the City of Detroit's Department of Innovation and Technology. Genesis Gavino, the Resilience Officer in the City of Dallas's Office of Equity and Inclusion. Jason Hartebeck, the Director of Broadband and Digital Equity for the Baltimore City Mayor's Office. And Leon Wilson, the PMP, Chief of Digital Innovation and Chief Information Officer for the City of Cleveland. Let's open with each panelist sharing a little bit about your background and the role that affordability programs like the Emergency Broadband Benefit can play in connecting your communities. Mr. Edmonds, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everybody. A special shout out to the acting commissioner and our acting chairwoman of the FCC. Thank you for allowing local cities to be heard in this matter. And, I think a lot of the points were really highlighted even in the last panel, which kind of showcases the way that cities collectively are thinking about this in a great way. But as we kind of zero in on this affordability challenge, and namely around this emergency broadband benefit, I think that historically, if we look at the context of the digital divide, definitely in the urban sense, we haven't really had the ability to have robust dialogue, or not even dialogue, but robust interventions around signing up people for services that they need. Historically, a lot of our large markets, even on this call today, we're duopolies in that we have one dominant provider and another dominant provider. And that's kind of the end of our options. I mean, yeah, you can throw in some wireless providers somewhere there, but that's not really the thing that we're really supporting to actually bridge the digital divide. Those are kind of more measures to address elements of it. But in true form or fashion of bridging the digital divide, when we're looking at this duopoly landscape, I think a lot of our challenges come from poverty. And when we look at the way that billing has disenfranchised people historically, I can point to the case in Detroit where I have folks who have essentially been priced out, where they have a past due bill with Comcast, they can't pay it, it's slowly ruining their credit, and then they jump over to the other dominant provider, and in this case, it's AT&T. Past due bill, there's no solution. And so whenever we see kind of this subsidy, it's a great way for us to begin looking at a longer term support structure. Obviously, it doesn't get to the root cause of the issue, which is people are living in poverty, and poverty is going to continuously make our fight significantly harder. But in this present moment, we have seen something that's illuminating a path forward where we know that if we're able to provide some type of subsidized support for residents who need the internet, they're going to be able to subscribe to that. And I think that every single one of the cities that are on this call today, I believe all of us have already crossed the 50,000 household threshold. And that's something where since June, or since May, I should say, mid-May, we had this emergency broadband benefit active. Us being able to sign that up, those residents up, I think we're going to get into some of the challenges as it associates with signing up people without funding being allocated at that level. But at the end of the day, we're now able to glean insight into the way that poverty has exacerbated this digital divide, and specifically the way that these subsidies are helping us think a little bit better and a little bit broader, where it is my hope that all of us are going to be able to leverage this collective experience to actually get some real legislation to be able to allow our residents not to have to be dependent on these subsidies. But again, we're taking advantage of it because it's actually the timely thing to do. And it's the right thing to do based on, again, the numbers that we're seeing and the historical context around the digital divide.
Thank you for that. And Ms. Gavino?
Good morning. Thank you, Kayla. As you stated, I am the Resilience Officer for the City of Dallas, and I am within the Office of Equity and Inclusion. I oversee the digital equity initiatives along with our Chief of Equity and Inclusion. And we serve as the convener within our organization to bring together all of our internal departments who are working on digital divide initiatives. And so all of our purpose is to ensure that equity is at the core of everything that we do, and ensuring that all of our marginalized and lowest communities of color, lower income neighborhoods are at the center of our decision-making process. And so the Resilience Division launched the first city-funded digital navigators program to ensure that the communities were able to access affordable low-cost internet subscription, acquire hardware for in-home use, and also deliver digital literacy and skills and training programs We have also partnered with our school district to get a broadband and digital equity strategic plan developed for us. And from that, we were able to get a community survey done where we know that lower income households lack connectivity, which is what we know across the nation, right? We know that affordability programs can help reduce the portion of household income that is used for utilities and, free up more of our households to be able to pay for things aside from just putting all of their paychecks into, their broadband bills or other utilities. And so that is, we're looking at the EBB to assist our households in that way.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hartebeck.
Good morning. Jason Hartebeck. I am the director of the Mayor's Office of Broadband and Digital Equity in Baltimore. It's a brand new office established by Mayor Scott to really take a hard look at the real fundamental issues in Baltimore. And I echo what Joshua has already said. A lot of similarities between Detroit and Baltimore in a lot of ways. With one exception, we really only have a monopoly. The telecom incumbent does not really actively serve the local market. So we have those same issues that he described. We have a significant challenge in our underinvested and low-income neighborhoods in Baltimore. We, by definition, Baltimore City is considered 100% served, right, by the conventional definition, and yet we have over 1/3 of our households, nearly 100,000 households, do not have reliable internet at home. And of the 80,000 kids that attend public schools, nearly 40,000 do not have reliable internet. So it is a huge issue, and it comes down to affordability, right? So a benefit like EBB is a huge, huge need and a lifeline. I think what we're looking at in Baltimore that may be a little bit different as well is that this really has to be approached as a stopgap. Subsidies alone cannot solve this. We are looking at access as critical public infrastructure, right? So I think this is a complement to that and a necessary and vital step in making affordability kind of core to the definition of what access means.
Thank you. And Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Kayla. Good morning, everyone. My name is Leon Wilson. I'm the Chief of Digital Innovation and CIO at the Cleveland Foundation. In my role at the Cleveland Foundation, I oversee all of our philanthropic grant making surrounding all things technology innovation, but also technology equity. So since 2017, the foundation saw it was an imperative that we look through the lens of digital equity as part of social equity. If we're really concerned with improving the quality of lives of residents in our grant making area, which is Cuyahoga County and a couple other neighboring counties. So since 2017, we've been really focused on this particular issue and, partnering with NDIA, partnering with many other cities around the country, really trying to understand what's the broader issue, but then what's that look like for here in Greater Cleveland. And from that, then putting forth a strategy for how we want to address those particular issues. Everyone is familiar with the three-legged stool metaphor. And we saw that was incredibly important. And we want to unpack that and figure out different tactical strategies, short-term and long-term, about how we go about addressing each one of those particular things. But also layer on top of that what we felt were some missing ingredients of that three-legged stool, i.e. a lot of people do a lot of things with refurbished computers and giving out computers and stuff like that. But computers are computers, they break. And what do you do when you need another one? So we really want to tackle tech support for those same computers and advocacy and outreach and engagement and community outreach. We want to tackle that as well. So since 2017, we've been working on this. We were blessed to do a lot of funding. At this time, actually, Joshua Edmonds was working with me here at the Cleveland Foundation at that time when we kicked off the mobile hotspot lending with our public libraries, and also with our housing authority, who have been great partners, as well as bringing in an organization called PCs for People that not only deal with, providing affordable refurbished computers to lower income residents, but also provided tech support and help desk support for those people. So doing all that stuff in 2018, what we didn't realize it prepared us for 2020. Not that we was ready for it, When the pandemic hit and our libraries, which constitute 70% of all of our publicly accessible computers throughout Greater Cleveland, when those closed and when our school district sent all the kids home. And many people know that Cleveland was one of the least connected communities throughout the country. We repeatedly, we're always tied toe to toe with Detroit. Sometimes they beat us, sometimes we beat them, and that was all depending on the poverty levels. But when that happened, it really exposed a greater issue. And we had to rally the troops to really address things and really start beginning to do even more with our additional investments. So again, since 2017-18, we've been doing a number of works here in Greater Cleveland to try to tackle this issue. Some things we've been great at, successful at, but as everyone knows, we talk about broadband connectivity. That was the more messier, muddier, wicked problem type of issue that wasn't going to be a quick fix.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on a little bit deeper into the emergency broadband program, which launched in May. Your cities have had successful enrollment campaigns. What strategies have worked in your cities to build awareness of the emergency broadband benefit and drive enrollment? We can start with Ms. Gavino.
Thank you, Kayla. So the city is part of a Internet for All coalition, which was convened by the Dallas Independent School District and an education nonprofit commit partnership to address the digital divide specifically for students. But we've now grown our members to include our community grassroots organizations and various stakeholders that include also our healthcare partners. And so when the EBB launched, members of the coalition, such as Dallas Innovation Alliance, conducted community outreach through targeted block walks, and the schools leveraged their community or their communications channels. And then the city leveraged various COVID testing and vaccination outreach efforts, right, to include small flyers that had information in English and Spanish, and then also had QR codes that directed people directly to the EBB page and provided an opportunity to engage people at, these events and give them that, quick elevator speech level about the EBB benefit. But aside from that, aside from the work of our coalition, our Dallas Public Library has been ahead of the curve in terms of digital equity initiatives. Even before the pandemic started, they already included in their budget to provide hotspots to the community. And so when the pandemic started, we were able to ramp up acquisition of that. And then we were also able to add laptops as, bundles, right, for our community. And so so we were picking up products from the library. We put flyers inside of books as well, the little QR codes. So even if you weren't picking up a laptop or hotspot bundle, you were also including flyers about the benefits, all of the different programs available to you or your household, or even anyone that you know about the availability of subsidy programs. And so, even as the previous panel also stated, collaborations with our anchor institutions is really key in leveraging their networks. Our office started the first equity and inclusion newsletter in the city, and we use that to provide information to our grassroots organizations that have provided us with their information to receive this our newsletter, and we give them timely information that way as well, so that they can filter it out to the communities that they serve.
Thank you for that. It sounds like the previous panel, it seems partnerships are really important in your city and your community. Mr. Hartebeck?
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah, I will echo that. I mean, partnerships are absolutely crucial. And, in Baltimore, we have a very active and engaged philanthropic community, including several foundations that have been very key in the digital inclusion efforts, not just during the pandemic, but, to date. About a year or so ago, as the pandemic really started to take hold, those foundations actually helped us establish a digital equity coalition, volunteer kind of grassroots community of different organizations and advocates. So that had become very key when the EBB program was announced to get that kind of first wave of communications and outreach out. Those also, a couple of those foundations also deployed funds that are now, including to the city and my office, to be able to fund outreach efforts with specific organizations. So really that grassroots, as we know, one of the challenges is the EBB program did not include resources to support the outreach efforts explicitly, right? So part of this is the challenge of kind of deploying these efforts in existing organizations who are already hopefully doing similar things and where this coincides with their mission. But it's always helpful to have extra resources to be able to fund a new initiative. And so I think that's been pretty key for what we're doing. Also, efforts to integrate those outreach initiatives into existing city services, the agencies that are providing services to citizens and residents that are eligible for EBB because they're eligible for other benefits as well. I'll also say that I think we are a long way from declaring a success, right? In the most recent enrollment data, we look at Baltimore, and it's a little hard to parse, right, because of zip code level data, but best estimates are that we've reached maybe 20% of the eligible households in Baltimore. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, that 20% is the easiest 20% to reach. There's a reason, those outreach efforts hit. They were the early adopters, if you will, the folks that understood the need, were able to navigate the process, et cetera. So I think the real work lies ahead, and that is figuring out how we can effectively reach the rest of, the 80% of our eligible residents.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Wilson, how does Cleveland compare?
Well, I'm actually kind of embarrassed to say that we didn't do much. Well, let me explain that. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we stood up a coalition similar to what Baltimore has, similar to what Detroit has, and so forth. And it's a monthly meeting. It's called the Greater Cleveland Digital Equity Coalition. What's great about that organization that we formalized is that we have averaging over 70 to 80 different organizations that join that Zoom call every month. I'm talking about our professional sports team, representatives from our professional sports team, our healthcare systems such as the Cleveland Clinic, all of our schools, our libraries, both at the county public, our nonprofits, our community development corporations, and our government agencies, and just regular everyday activists and advocates. They joined this call to find out what the heck is going on. So we use that platform. We have different smaller working groups for people that just want to work with K through 12, or just want to work with seniors, or just want to work with the under and unemployed, and so forth. But we use that platform to communicate what's happening. And we use that communication mechanism to talk about the EBB program, what it was, because to be quite honest, many of us were kind of apprehensive. We were afraid that was it going to be another bait and switch for our low marginalized residents, and that if we told them something, would they not get it? And then we lose the trust that we built with them. So it was utterly important that we didn't want to do a major splash, news media and all that sort of stuff. We just went grassroots, and we just went low tech and work with our residents, work with all the people through the Greater Digital Equity Coalition to get the word out, but also help these residents understand what the heck's going on, how to get through the eligibility process, because they didn't want to sit on the phone for 30, 40 minutes trying to determine if they were eligible or not. So they needed to be handheld with what we call digital navigators that we stood up as well here in Greater Cleveland with the support of the county and also my foundation. But we were surprised with the numbers, but that's because a lot of passionate, engaged people that have been engaged in this issue for now over a year and a half, part of the coalition, wanted to do something, but wanted to make sure it was done right, and that we didn't lose the trust factor relationship that we have with the residents that lean on the nonprofit communities and the faith-based communities and the refugee resettlement centers and people like that. They lean on them heavily. So we just share with them what's going on and let them do the work and get out the way.
Thank you so much for that. And Mr. Edmonds.
I as a side point on the partnership piece, I think that when people are saying, we have to partner, we're partnering out of necessity. We've never really had ample funding anyway to stand up on our own. So it's not like we have a choice to partner. Like there's literally no bridge built to the other side of the digital divide without partnership, because we don't have resources and access to do anything on our own. But locally, we moved with a sense of fear. I was legitimately afraid for the reasons that Leon had said about the trust part, but also on the fact that I couldn't be able to, one, look my mayor in the face and say there was an internet subsidy and we didn't take advantage of it in Detroit. Many of us, in the municipal sense, are still, we've created offices that are relatively new. My office was created in 2019. And obviously, yeah, they gave us some time before the pandemic to prepare, for which a lot of our efforts have stood on top of. Our coalition that's been built, we've been able to do commercials. There's a recorded commercial of us talking about how to sign up for the emergency broadband benefit. It's 30 seconds long. We stood up our own call center, 313-241-7618. That is a 313 number. That is a Detroit number. The reason why we did that is because we didn't want to actually push out a 1-800 or 188 number. We just felt like that was not going to be, residents weren't going to trust that. And our call center does not obviously verify people because we're not able to do that. But what we can do is we can provide the awareness and the support around what is the benefit, what are the questions that they're going to ask you, how do we pre-prepare you as a resident so you know what's coming. In addition to that, we partner with the AARP. We are a Black church city. And so we have a lot of Black churches throughout Detroit. And so we partner with AARP. They are actually disseminating the paper EBB applications to residents and congregations and pastors. In addition to that, we've also for all of our public housing residents on their rental statements, we put the call center number, we put the actual emergency broadband benefit, whatever, the website. So we've honestly tried to do as much as possible. In addition, we've activated radio, we've activated media. And most recently, we have an agreement with Comcast where they share our EBB PSA on their Comcast On Demand. And so anyone who is watching Xfinity or On Demand or anything, they're going to see our emergency broadband benefit commercial. Mind you, all this stuff is done under the auspices of Connect 313. So it's a Connect 313 call center. It's a Connect 313 number. It's a Connect 313 outreach campaign. That allows us as a municipality to be very agile in our partnership because we're doing it under the guise of this larger collective and coalition, for which it's really easy for us to be able to do one style of marketing and then disseminate clearly, because then everyone's a Connect 313 partner. I do know that obviously it's Digital Inclusion Week, so a lot of us on this call right now are being pulled in many different ways. And yesterday we did another awareness push and we had 100 residents calling our call center. And I think that that's just something where that infrastructure in place, if we're able to embolden it moving forward, it's a real unique scenario where we can say we're building up the bridge, a partnership bridge rooted in trust and awareness on the federal government throwing a Hail Mary, but we're actually able to catch it now because we have the appropriate infrastructure in place for people to take advantage of. Much to Jason's point, we have a long way to go to signing people up, but quite frankly, signups have slowed nationally anyway. And so we have a really great ability to be able to double down on what we've done, as well as, again, glean insights from other folks in this call, things that we need to be doing as well.
Thank you for that. A lot of information here, and the words keep popping up: partnership, and trust, community trust, especially. I want to move on to another question about working with a variety of organizations in your community to raise awareness and community members. Wanted to kind of discuss the importance of grassroots community leaders to generating interest in these types of programs. Mr. Wilson, we'll start with you, and then anyone who wants to jump in, please.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So as I mentioned, back in late April or early May of 2020, we stood up what we call the Greater Cleveland Digital Equity Coalition, and it just grew like wildfire. Everybody in Greater Cleveland that was concerned about this digital divide issue wanted to be on that call. And I'm talking about, we had, senior executives of Fortune 500 companies that was dispatching one of their executive vice presidents to represent that particular city. That particular corporation. Our Chamber of Commerce was getting the word out through their membership about the importance of it, because now it had a trickle-down effect of workforce development and impairing when people were underemployed and underskilled and things of that nature. But again, it was just reaching out. I mean, Cleveland is a mid-sized city, but we know a lot. We know who we need to know to bring them into the fold. But at the same time, there's always one more group that says, "Hey, you forgot about us," that we're pulling in. So for 6 months, we just kept pulling in more and more individuals on this particular call. It was just a standing call. Everybody knew the last Thursday of every month at 11 o'clock, join this Zoom call. We kept it consistent. You join, you don't join, no harm, no foul. And we just kept getting the word out. We were also blessed that because, at the Cleveland Foundation, we are a very trusted partner in the social sector community. When we put out a call, a lot of people realize that they're going to get valuable, reliable, credible information from us. So using our bully pulpit to bring and galvanize the folks to say that we need to partner, we need to collaborate was utterly important. But it was definitely, as to your question about grassroots community folks, it was definitely going to the housing authorities, the libraries, the small nonprofits, the small workforce development organizations, the community development centers, and really informing their staff members and getting them to sign on and be on board with them. And we will provide them the financial support they need to compensate their time and energy and efforts. That wasn't a problem, especially since we were the foundation. So we can give the money pretty quickly. But it was definitely just making sure that we wanted to make sure that we weren't missing anyone and who else needs to be on board. So it was an open call. It wasn't an invitation only kind of thing. You come, even if you were just an everyday resident and you were just curious. We also had the providers join the call. There was concerns about, do we want this to be a non-provider so that we can vent and talk about AT&T, talk about T-Mobile, Verizon, Charter, Spectrum, and things of that nature. And we said, no, bring them. So they had their public relations officials on the call. Every call, they're talking about what they're trying to do, and they're hearing straight from the residents directly. So I think it was actually a win-win. Not only have the grassroots community on board with this, but also to have providers hear from the horse's mouth.
I'll say, similar to Leon with the coalition approach, building that table big enough for everyone to have that voice there. Again, providers included, because look, we're not going to keep you behind the back door. You need to be front and center here too, because what's going to happen if you're not front and center, they're going to be asking me questions. And if I answer the questions the right way, it's like I'm endorsing you. But if I say no, then it looks like I'm going against you. It's like, no. You answer these questions. And so what we actually did in March, I remember we had a call with Next Century Cities, NDIA, and the FCC. And I invited all of our community folks and said, hey, if you have any questions around this emergency broadband benefit, because if you all remember, we submitted public comment, I believe in January or February, and they were trying to get as much feedback as possible. At that time, we did not know the exact start date. I think a lot of us thought it was going to start in April. And so I was trying to mobilize community beforehand to say, hey, if you have any issues with this, stand up and say something. We did another one in April. If you have any issues with this, stand up or say something. And then what happened in June, we were still frustrated. Late June, we were already kind of running our call center. And I actually had a meeting with or arranged with some of your senior FCC staff and our community members. I'm like, this is a venting session. All of us who are having some issues signing up residents, all of us who are saying that it didn't do this or didn't do that, we've been able to actively engage with the FCC in providing feedback. And quite frankly, I think that's where a lot of residents are now, we're getting an additional level of trust there, because now people are actually articulating what they're seeing. And now they're not blaming the municipality on this stuff, because they're like, look, we're just as lost as you are in some of this stuff. We need to be doing this together. And so that coalition of us being transparent and honest and being able to provide that feedback and seeing it exist in real time and seeing folks in Washington being receptive to what we're saying, that's been another barrier or another breakthrough. And I think it's allowing us to be a lot more agile, again, a lot of our other efforts, because we're garnering that trust with us being as open and transparent from the internet provider to the resident. All folks are being able to express whatever they want to express. And I think that that's been allowing us to, again, move forward in a way where you're seeing some of these higher numbers coming from Detroit because of the way we've been as receptive to feedback and giving people the forum to provide it.
I will add to that, Kayla. One of the benefits of us launching for the first time a digital navigators program for the city is we were able to fund organizations that have never worked with the city prior to the pandemic, right? And so they were able to get their foot in the door, and then we could also get more information from our community. So one of the biggest pieces of our work is data. And the previous panel talked about this, the unreliability of federal data. And so we at the city have developed our own equity impact assessment tool that we use during COVID to really identify neighborhoods that are at risk for prolonged economic hardship because of the pandemic, and then also all of their socioeconomic vulnerabilities. And so using that and being able to work with our community partners to ask them, does this sound right? Can you validate this, right? So they're that's that additional validation of information, what they see on the ground, and telling us what the communities actually need. So it's this cyclical process of we're churning out these maps, these data sets, but then the community and our grassroots organization tell us, okay, this is actually a much higher risk area versus this because of this is what we see. And that data doesn't have a lag similar to if we're using the census, right? Or if we're using FCC data. That's like real-time information that we can then pivot the work that we're doing. And so those community organizations truly are the boots on the ground that then can help shape how we form our programs and the delivery of service from the city side and even from our philanthropic side, right? They're like, what do we need to fund or who needs to get funded? Similarly to the community and outreach engagement piece, like Mr. Edmonds said, there's no money for that to talk about EBB. And we're actually taking Mr. Edmonds' model of asking our ISPs to then put commercials, right, on their splash pages or use their advertising arm to get people to know about the EBB. We've made that request to two of our biggest ISPs in the area and, you know, seeing what they're going to do about that because they do have a captive audience more so than the city would. And we don't have money for that, but our ISPs do have the money and we can leverage that. So just wanted to add those two pieces.
Well, I feel like I'm compelled to actually say something as well. And I will just plus one to every comment that's been made. And in addition, you know, Baltimore, it's said, is a city of neighborhoods, right? So the piece that our coalition building and kind of the organizations that are at the table now don't represent everyone. And one of our I think an opportunity is to develop strategies where we can actually go more to the neighborhood level. There are, you know, in kind of taking that trust model, you know, to the next logical step, there's always one or two people within a given neighborhood that, you know, they're kind of the go-to. And so in addition to EBB, there are a lot of initiatives that we are going to be rolling out, you know, complementary initiatives around digital inclusion and internet service and the like. And so I think it's incumbent on us to develop a strategy where we can actually tap those same trusted resources and relationships, you know, over time. So this isn't just a one-shot deal where we're just trying to get the word out around EBB, you know, this one deal. I think this really is the start of a much more, you know, comprehensive and long-term strategy.
Well, thank you for that information. I want to go back to something you mentioned about communities. Each of you represent a diverse city, and research shows that communities of color are less likely to have home broadband access. How can we inform households that are not currently connected about affordability programs like the EBB?
I'm just going to say something really quick here because I actually want to see what other folks are going to say. But that research that's showing that, again, I'm going to bring up the earlier point on a lot of us not having as many options on the home internet front and us having significantly more options on the wireless front. But one of the things I'm going to bring up in about 2014 to 2016, there was that beautiful thing called the Amazon Fire Stick. And Black people, namely, because this is just what I know from being in barbershops across this country, were passing out these Amazon Fire Sticks. And it's like, hey, I can get you any movie that you want on this Fire Stick. Everyone was doing that. And I think that Amazon wasn't marketing their Fire Sticks in that same way. They weren't going to these communities. It was spreading because people saw a value in it already. That, wow, I can get any movie that I want. I can do whatever I want. They're there. The thing that I'm saying is that there needs to be an equivalent internet on the low campaign style of like, hey man, I got that internet on the low. All you gotta do is call this number. That same thing needs to take. And it's not taking because I think the way that we're kind of over professionalizing this discussion, when true to form, technology has already been rooted in our community in a way where this stuff has spread through barbershops, spread through gas stations. You see that. And I think that that's the way that we need to be thinking about, because that's the population that we need to reach, not in this over professionalized way of doing things. I'm going to stop talking though, because again, that's just something that I noticed. And I'm trying to do the same thing in Detroit. So if you see a campaign that seems a little bit sketchy, it's intentionally designed that way.
Well, I will add to that. So along the lines of what Mr. Edmonds is saying, so we use those individualized trusted partners in communities. So if you work in the equity space, you understand that organizations can also serve as gatekeepers to information. And so you need to build trust with individuals and not just organizations themselves. And so our welcoming division has actually leveraged the use of promotoras. And so what that is, it's a model, kind of like a community health worker model, where you provide them the training, right? So train the trainer and they go out into the community. And we use this for our COVID-19 testing and vaccine information distribution. But using the similar kind of model of your cousin or your aunt or your uncle telling you about the availability of a benefit, and then, you know, walking you through that process because they've also gone through it and know that it works very well. But then aside from, you know, using that promoter, going back to using building our own data sets of how do we know where to serve and who to serve, we built a language access map where we can pinpoint in neighborhoods what are the actual languages spoken aside from English and Spanish, which are the predominant languages, right? But we know there are more than 40 languages spoken in our city. And so if we can already come prepared with the information in that language and not have to be, you know, not have to come back a week later and say, oh, actually, now I finally found a translator and here's the information you needed, but you're prepared and it shows that you're ready to give information, right? So it's that type of trust building with your communities of not just leveraging, you know, individuals who are known leaders and not community organizations that can serve as gatekeepers as well.
And I'll chime into what Genesis and Joshua mentioned, but what I'll say is here in Cleveland, we have what we call the same damn map problem. You mentioned that research shows that community colors are less likely to, and I will put ... because it's not just having broadband. It may be infant mortality issues, poverty issues, lack of access to affordable housing, paying your water bill issues. It's just ... So whatever solutions we identified in the past to help individuals in that particular way to address other kind of subsidy-based programs, then we ought to be going back and looking at that playbook and maybe looking at how can we refine it. It is going hyper-local for a hyper-local issue. And working with the barbershops and the beauty salons and the faith-based organizations. And as Jason said, Baltimore is a city of neighborhoods. Cleveland's the same damn way. So it's working with our community development corporations, where each neighborhood has one, to really get the word out with those trusted advisors. So again, very diverse organizations, but again, we're just tackling another systemic issue of poverty. So what were some of the other ways that we tackled this when there was a temporal or maybe even permanent subsidy program that came about? How do we inform the family members about it and then help them get enrolled in those type of programs?
So echo all, as I'm broken record here, but I will also, I need to attribute Leon because I have just added same damn map to my vocabulary going forward because it's exactly right? Food deserts, public safety, you name it, it's all the same map. And it kind of goes to what I think Joshua started out by saying too, like I am not the spokesperson for Baltimore City and EBB. It needs to be authentic and genuine. It needs to be the people you trust, people that you can relate to. And so part of what we've been doing, again, referring back to those grants, is helping to fund the organizations that can actually speak to that. And not just the message, but the channels and the platforms, right? Like what's the most effective way to reach a particular population? And maybe it's social media, it's it's ways of relating, and it's not just broadcast media. We see some of the, I think, initial efforts were around more of a direct mail type campaign. There's a lot of junk mail already, right? You have to rise above the noise, and that really starts with starting with people that you trust. Without continuing to beat on that horse, I'll end there.
But I can add one more thing to all that, and especially as a funder, as a major foundation. One of the things that I know that we've been very poor at, but I know many foundations are trying to get better at, is really funding community outreach and community engagement. Because again, for too long, it's been underfunded and it's been done as missionary work. For people, the passion, the activists, the advocates, as well as treating it as a profession and actually compensating it for its work, because that's what's going to get things done, especially for these type of really hard. These are hardest to reach individuals, and they're hard to reach for a specific reason. So it's not going to be through conventional mechanisms that we get outreach to these folks. We have to basically just fund the people to get in there and do what they need to do. More kind of like a trust-based philanthropy approach, just trust that they will get it done. But it's something that when I talk to other foundations, and yes, I talked to many of the funders in Baltimore, I'm close to many of them. I've talked to many, funders in other cities as well. It's just trying to advocate that, yeah, you can write a check to get out 10,000 laptops. You can write a check to cover, 50,000 hotspots. But to fund outreach, to fund engagement, education, advocacy, that's harder to measure, but is twice as important.
Thank you for that really important information for our audience. And I want to move on to a question about taking time to develop awareness, and the issue of trust does come up here for new government benefit programs. When we hear $50 off your internet bill or free internet, it may sound like it's too good to be true. Can you talk about strategies you have built to use trust in these kind of programs, or the convenience for residents, for them to know that this is legitimate?
So I'll start going back to, the Promotora model, and then what our digital navigators has done is really building in time to talk to households, right? To heads of households and in our communities. I think in the previous panel, Ms. Fink Yates said it takes time. You have to build that into your program. And also echoing what Mr. Wilson said, you have to fund community outreach and engagement, because that's a big piece to adoption. And so aside from that is your outreach and engagement people have to be armed with the information, because if a community member asks you a question and you say, I don't know, that already diminishes any level of trust that is there or was possibly there. And so now you're back to zero, right? Or you take 2 steps back. And so helping and arming them with the information about the full scope of EBB, how to get information, right? Or even just being transparent with your residents and say, I don't know, but I will, I will engage with you. I will get that information for you and follow up. And it's that follow-up piece that's really critical. So, that builds for the trust, building trust with your community, showing that you will follow up with them. And we've learned that in various different spaces, that you don't just answer or, show up once, but you show up continuously and be able to show that you'll be there regularly.
I'll jump in here. I think in terms of when EBB was announced and rolled out, right? It amazing program, happened at least seemingly very quickly, right? Which hugely important. There was, though, in terms of this kind of limited time offer, right? It's a temporary program. It's, when the money runs out, there were a lot of questions about how long it would actually last. And, the fact that ISPs had to opt in, there was, I think, some foot dragging there on, is this really going to be worth it? I remember having the thought that what happens in 6 months when this money runs out and I have 10,000 emails to the mayor asking where my free internet is, right? Because it's all those things like you don't see everything that can be behind the curtain. And so I think that that probably impacted the rollout, right? Because there was just the nature of this. I think those are some of the things that we will fundamentally get through, especially if we start looking at benefits that have a much more longer duration. Then you're solving the problem once you're making that, that connection. I think it starts to get easier because now you have those trusted, referrals. People who are using it can tell their friends, neighbors, family about it. And that's really the key. I don't think there's much more that certainly from a government perspective we can do to convince somebody that they should trust. They should trust this is a good thing. It really has to come from somebody they know and trust themselves.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to say something that Jason talked about, where the first thing before we started really talking about it, we really want to emphasize what happens afterwards. What's next? What happens? That we needed to be fundamentally aware of what was going to happen, what was potential, so that when we go out and promote this, we were given the full information, not just trying to get them to quickly sign up, because it goes back to the trust factor of not just our trust with them, but their trust with us, if you will. So it worked both ways. And it also was iterative touch points. It wasn't just talking to someone one time. Sometimes it may have taken 4 or 5 times to talk to a particular household before you get them to sign up for it and embrace and adopt it. So when we talk about community outreach, it is a definitely iterative, cyclical, multiple touch points per household, per family member, per friend. No different than for getting the vaccination, where some people did it after one announcement, and some people you had to talk to them 15,000 times before they said, all right already.
The only thing I'm gonna comment on, because Leon definitely summed up exactly what everyone did around the knocking on the same door over and over and over again. Finally, someone opens it. But I think the pandemic is forcing us to dribble with our left hand. And what I mean by that in the basketball sense, that a lot of people, let's say you're right-handed, you dribble with your right. Then all of a sudden the pandemic happens, and the things that you would do to authentically garner that trust, going out, relying on volunteers, because again, a lot of us don't have historic funding to be able to use to fund community engagement. A lot of our folks that we would be relying on volunteers are saying, hey, we can't do in-person volunteers. I'm like, oh, darn it. Then we see with the emergency broadband benefit, your large internet providers not opting in to provide a device subsidy. The device subsidy being the thing that we could also use as an additional carrot to get people signed up. Okay, so that doesn't work. And we can keep going down the list. Barbershops closing, small businesses closing, people getting moved around. In Detroit, we've been experiencing flooding all summer. There's just been things that have just been compounding this, that's forcing us to dribble with our left hand, which is making us be a bit uncomfortable. And that's fine, because that's the nature of the game. But I think that for us, one of the, this is just horrible to say, but I mean, the fact that signups are kind of slowed nationally, and a lot of your local larger cities are kind of signing up more people. I think what that allows us to do, we can look at spend. Now we can articulate, okay, fine. Given the current spend, now I can trust signing up people for this, because I thought that this thing was going to be exhaustive within 6 months. And then after a while, now that I'm looking at the end of the year, I'm like, wait a second, have we even cracked 1 billion? And that's something where as I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait, we have some time to sign people up. I can now say with a bit more certainty. Now my right hand is still taken away because all the carrots that I would use, I can't do, but there is a way where I can say, hey y'all, I trust this. And this isn't something that we're going to be yanking the rug from underneath you. The only thing, because I'd be remiss if I did not mention this, as we've done all this work signing people up, and as we're looking at this infrastructure bill, and there's another benefit in there, I just can't have all this work that we did and all this funding that we did and had to walk someone through another sign-up process again. I think that's going to be one of the most detrimental things that you could do to an ecosystem. And I'll go on record. I'll be angry, and I won't shut up about how angry I am if I have to go through and sign all these residents up again. That is going to be one of the worst things we could possibly do. So I think there needs to be a lot more thinking, yes, on the now what as it relates to the benefit itself, but also as it relates to signing up people for other offers that are being marketed as something similar. That has to be central to the conversation moving forward, because if not, you're going to have a whole lot of angry people, myself included.
Thank you for that. And that's a good leeway into our next question. And this was also mentioned, slightly different topic, but in the same on the first panel. Broadband services were a factor for many households before the pandemic, and that will continue after the pandemic. Congress is considering a longer-term successor program to the EBB. how would you change your outreach approach based on lessons learned from the EBB and the different opportunities a longer-term program may present?
I guess I can start. I would take some time now, knowing that it's going to be around a little while longer. I think as Joshua and as Jason and Genesee, we all mentioned that, we were rushing because we thought it might run out in 6 months, so we wanted to get ours. But now that we know there's a potential that it may be around for a while longer, we can really, sometimes they say you got to slow down before you can speed up. So this might be an opportunity for us to slow down, see what worked, what didn't work, what may have worked in other cities, start talking to other cities because now we have some time, and then put together a really more structured, proactive program to really, again, accelerate the uptick, the adoption of the programs, and the more engagement from an outreach perspective. So I would definitely say it will allow us more time to think a little bit carefully about how we go about doing this so that we can make sure we reach the households that we truly need to reach.
Along those same lines, I would say, so modifying the way we do our programs, right? But then also working with our ISPs to see what are the barriers that our residents face when they were signing up. How can we change it on their end? What can their customer service centers or their call centers, the people who answer their calls, right? What can they do better, and how can they better inform their call centers about the availability of EBB and what that program entails? So it's a multi-pronged approach, right? So from the grassroots perspective, from local jurisdictions perspective, and then ISPs, because we can't forget that they are there and they have a role to play. So I think it's incumbent upon us to keep calling them out and asking them to play a bigger role in this and have a stake in ensuring that people also get signed up for the EBB.
I'd like to actually follow up on this, and my answer is going to be a little bit different. Because one of my concerns is that a long-term benefit is seen as a solution and not a stopgap, because the reality is that a subsidy is just about really perpetuating that kind of scarcity notion of good enough, right? What is good enough and what's barely adequate, as opposed to what this needs to be as abundance, right? That same damn map, problem applies to this as well. And so one of my concerns is if, in kind of viewing funding, from the federal dollars flowing in the broadband, if they're viewing infrastructure as a rural problem only, and that subsidy fixes the urban problem, that's a huge mistake, right? Because fundamentally it's infrastructure everywhere. And so I think we have to move beyond some of these definitions of what, overbuilding means and what served versus underserved and unserved means, and really start addressing the root cause. And that is to attack affordability at the root. You have to address this proprietary structural costs. You have to commoditize the network. And that's really what I think we need to focus on, certainly in Baltimore and probably in every urban center, because otherwise you never get beyond this idea of a subsidy or a, passing along a little bit and kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, and last thing I just want to add to what Jason mentioned is that also if the subsidy is at a fixed price, but the price of the plans at some point in time go up $5, then the valuation of that subsidy diminishes. So just need to factor that in if that is something that needs to be factored in. I don't think they're going to have fixed prices forever, or they may degrade their performance and stuff like that. So we got to be mindful of that. And then to another thing that Joshua mentioned about signups. I think a lot of people that are low income, poor people are just really tired of proving that they're poor. So anything that we can do to reduce the likelihood that it's like sign up one, register once, and in some kind of clearinghouse system. Why do I have to constantly prove that I'm poor umpteen times for the same program? Whether it is I was with Comcast, now I go to AT&T, but then I got to reapprove that I'm poor again. Anything that we can do to reduce the administrative burden on on individuals that are marginalized, that are hardest hit, is an equity issue.
So we are hitting the end of this panel. I'd like to thank each of you for taking the time to join us today and sharing your experiences and strategies for success. I'm looking forward to continuing working with you and your communities to ensure that everyone is connected. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to the acting chairwoman for closing remarks.
Thank you. So now I know who the dynamos are who really get things done. It's been a treat to sit back and listen to you. And I'm going to mull for a little while on that same damn map problem. I'm probably going to have to find another way to refer to it. But there's a lot to unpack in that. I also want to do another shout out for Joshua Edmonds, who was talking to my staff about these issues, and that's why we're all gathered here today. So I hope you got a lot out of this discussion. I also know that it is a lot to sit in these little boxes at these virtual conferences much more than 2 hours. So we want to bring this dialogue to an end. But I did want to send you off with a few thoughts. You know, it was back in 2015, before Digital Inclusion Week was established, and that's pre-pandemic. And lately I'm having a hard time remembering those days, but it was the semi-novel idea then that internet access was essential for modern life. And of course, this pandemic has made it clear that internet access and broadband is no longer nice to have, it's need to have for everyone, everywhere. It's healthcare, it's education, it's staying connected with family and friends, it's work, it is full participation in modern civic and commercial life. And when you see over 6 million Americans signing up for a program like the Emergency Broadband Benefit, well, that tells you something. There are too many that are struggling to afford internet service. They're making impossible choices about where to spend their money on groceries, and, you know, can they keep up their internet connection so their kid can do their nightly homework and classwork. The 6 million number is significant. And by the way, we're still getting about 200,000 new signups every week. But all of that illustrates the scale of our problem we're going to try to address when we talk about digital equity. And when we think about those numbers, all of it seems really big, but we are never going to be able to solve this problem if we do think about it from Washington actor to Washington actor, from state to state, from county to county. This is a program that succeeds because we move household to household. And that's why the work of everyone here is so significant. It has become clear to me, it's become clear to the FCC that we need local trusted actors working with this program, working with us to make it reach its full potential. So we've made a lot of progress. We got more work to do. I want everyone here to be committed to making Digital Inclusion Week work, keeping up the hard work. And then I also want you to know, you're the people who are boots on the ground, who are trusted in your communities. You have ideas about how we can make this program work better in its existing form, as it may exist in the future with the new infrastructure bill. I want you to know my office is open to those ideas. I'm open to those ideas. Everyone at the FCC is open to those ideas. I think if we take some of your learnings and take advantage of the fact that you have trust that's built up in your communities, we're going to figure out ways to make sure that we get broadband to 100% of us and that we make high-speed internet service available to everyone, everywhere. Thank you all for the work you do. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm grateful for it.